This video presentation is made possible by the SLO County Department of Education and the SLO Co-Arts Collaborative. For over a century, the Central Coast of California has been a haven for people from all walks of life. Pioneers, entrepreneurs, farmers, innovators, artists, dreamers. People escaping the city life to find beautiful landscapes, rich culture, seeking prosperity, and most importantly, joy. For a lot of us, we find joy in art, whether we're makers or just lucky enough to enjoy the art of others.
Hi, I'm Peter Henry Schroeder. I'm a local documentary filmmaker here in San Luis Obispo County. I invite you to come with me now as we actually get to go talk to some of these artists firsthand and learn about what makes them tick. What are some of the challenges they face, and how do they do this on a day-to-day basis? Where does their inspiration come from, and how do they actually find the joy in their art? What really gives them that creative juice?
My name is Laddon, and I make pastels and oils, and I used to make silkscreen prints. Before that, I made posters in high school, and before that, I made signage for my little friends in the 6th grade. So I have loved color and loved making things my whole life. I grew up in San Diego, next to Mexico, where bright colors abound. And San Diego, bright, clear light. So I always thought of myself as a kind of a California girl, you know, in those days. I started out in high school taking a silkscreen printmaking class. I got to use a lot of color, and I got to cut very precise stencils and shapes out of things, so I liked doing that. I liked typography, and so I did posters also. I went to Occidental College. I studied art history and psychology. I had a double major. My family encouraged me to go into art history because they thought maybe I could be a museum curator or something like that. Actually, it was invaluable to me to study art history. I just learned so much about all of the different periods and found artists that I really loved. When I started really studying fine art, like printmaking, it was with Christina Marek, a wonderful Polish woman, and I just heard about her class, and I remembered that I had taken a class in high school, and so I had a little bit of experience, but it was thrilling to me to see what you could do with color and layering and shapes, and decided that that's what I was going to do. I was going to be a silkscreen printmaker instead of a graphic designer, or combine the two or something like that. So I was a silkscreen printmaker at a wonderful art center in Washington, D.C. area, actually in Alexandria, Virginia. I was there from 74 to 84, and I was one of the founding members of this art center that was in a torpedo factory. For screen printing, the way I did it, I would take a pencil, like a mechanical pencil, and a big piece of tracing paper, and I would carefully draw all of the outlines of the shapes in advance before I even thought about the colors. You have to design how are you going to divide up your two-dimensional space. You have to, have an idea for that. For this one, I owned one of these old typewriters, and I took a photograph of it, and I blew the photograph up so that I could see all the shapes of the keys. And then I just started tweaking it on my drawing. So I didn't trace the photograph. No tracing, not allowed. But I did have a compass and a ruler, and I carefully made all of the circles for all the keys. So I would plan the image that way first. And then I would say, okay, now take another piece of tracing paper and let's fill it in like a coloring book. Kind of, well, what color do you want to make this section and that section? And so I would have a complete roadmap or plan in advance for a silkscreen. And then I would spend the next month probably each day making a different color. I would cut a stencil for each color Like, let's say I'm working on the red, I would cut a big, huge hole, but I would leave covered up on the stencil wherever I didn't want the red to go. And so for each color, it's a separate stencil. So here I've got, this is where I store my vintage silkscreen prints. And here's one of my most popular ones. This is a Nikon, old Nikon F camera. And if you look at it just in a certain light, you can see how shiny the ink is, and you can see what I was describing earlier was the overlap of the inks, one over the other. I used artist oil paints instead of silkscreen inks to make these, so they're transparent. You can see this beautiful rag paper coming through, this crazy moon. These were the hippie days, so I don't know what possessed me, but I put the moon in there. And anyway, this is one of those that I hand-pulled silkscreen. These little textures I did by affixing a kind of a transparent texture that you bought. It was it had adhesive on one side and stuck that to the to a photo silkscreen gel and exposed it, and that's how that little leatherette pattern happened. But all of these little numbers and things are all hand cut. Anyway, so when you look at a real silkscreen print sideways to the light a little bit, you can kind of see the ridges where the inks overlap each other. People go, "Oh, that doesn't look that complicated," and I go, "Well, it did take me 32 days to make 120 of them, or however many. I would make an edition of maybe 100 or 130 prints. Here's another one that was really popular. This one has all the old songs on it. So this one has what we call rainbow rolls on it. So each of these, like that was one stencil, just that color, and I mixed 2 shades of this green and pulled the squeegee this way to establish that one shape. And then the next day I cut a stencil that shape and printed yellow to green and pulled the squeegee that way. Then in these areas, same thing, another rainbow roll. So how many do I have on here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 rainbow rolls on this. I do miss it, but it was toxic. I had to wear a gas mask to protect myself from the fumes because, of course, I was using all kinds of bad things to make the stencils stick to the silk. Anyway, over the years, I did images of things that I loved or that I thought were kind of nifty. I had an old Nikon camera, so I thought, okay, I'm going to make a silkscreen of my camera and blow it way up. I did a bicycle. I did a silkscreen of my 10-speed bicycle. Lots of kind of pop art subjects, but they were just things that I loved, that were popular at that time. The thing that was satisfying about silkscreening was you were making an edition. You had inventory when you were done. You had 130 things to sell, and I sold them at these art shows in New York and in Europe, and then I made prints of the prints and sold those through poster shops all over the country. In fact, when I moved out here in '84 from Washington, D.C., I brought hundreds and hundreds of these posters with me, and I went out for a burger with my husband to Carl's Jr., and there they were on the walls. Carl's Jr. had bought all these prints of mine and decorated their early burger joints. I did that for 15 years. I loved it, loved it. In '84, I moved out here to Paso Robles and found myself way out in Adelaide on a ranch with no gallery and all my silkscreen equipment. Then I had two wonderful children, and about the mid-90s, when my youngest child was about 7, I was able to leave him at home with his dad and say, okay, see you, and I'll be back in a week. And I went to Sayulita, Mexico with a bunch of other painters. And I was one of the beginners, but I had this great teacher, this gal from New Mexico, Ann Templeton, and she just took me under her wing and said, go, you go girl, go, and just kept critiquing. And I would paint a painting over and over again until I would get it right, you know. And I threw out and burned hundreds, gone. I don't want to see them ever again. I just kept trying, just practice and practice and practice. It is always interesting. I don't have to throw out quite as many now as I used to. Quite as many, no, but every year we have a burn party, January 1st, and we all throw our bad paintings in the pile. It feels really good to not have them chattering at you. It's how important it is that your drawing skills are good when you start painting. Well, I just liked coloring, so I went straight for the color and didn't pay any attention to whether I needed to draw or not, or draw well. That did become a problem because my paintings looked kind of amateurish when I would start to do architecture or the figure. I could get away with it with a mountain and a couple of trees because they could be any old shape and nobody would know whether you really knew what you were doing or not. About 5 years into oil painting, once I realized how my drawing skills were a little weak, even though my color was good, my drawing skills not so high, that I thought, well, I really better learn how to draw. A friend of mine was taking a pastel class here in Morro Bay, and by a famous pastelist, and she said, well, do you want to come and take it with me? And I said, oh sure, I have some pastels. And I went there and realized how fabulous pastels are as an adjunct to my oil painting. And so for the next 4 or 5 years, I did strictly pastels, and that's where I collected this fabulous array of my toys, I call it my playthings. Doing pastels, working on paper, a kind of a sandpaper, you have to draw. And they were fast, and it was inexpensive to throw it out. At the end of the day, if you didn't like it, I could do a lot of little studies. I could work with color and drawing at the same time. And so for me, it was a really wonderful experience, and I finally learned how to look at a figure and draw it with shapes, just to see the big shapes. And same thing with architecture. I got really good at drawing buildings that didn't look all wonky and odd. But it was a lot of practice. Anyway, pastels were a really great medium for that. So this painting here is a pastel that I did on location at Montana de Oro. And it was a really windy day, and the water was swirling around, and because it was a pastel, it was fast and it was easy to do, and I just picked up these colors and captured this aqua and cold. It feels cold and windy, which is lovely. Anyway, I did this one on location, and then I brought it back to the studio, and I made a big, huge oil painting of it on this chunky linen canvas again, and that's what's on the back wall. So here it is. Now I have a kind of a light red canvas color on this one that you see peeking through everywhere and kind of unifying things, and then big huge strokes of very different colors, and hopefully capturing some of the swirling waters and so forth of that day that we saw in the pastel. So the other day I was watching the lupin in the fields around our home, and it only reaches perfection for just 2 or 3 days, and then it's gone. And so I rushed out with my pastels and sat down and painted this study. This is not finished, it's about half finished. And then I took a picture because I'm going to finish it here in the studio. And here's what it looked like, and here's what I made of it so far. So this is a little flat. I'm very critical of this now, but it was super beautiful. The shape, the particular shape of the lupin display in the grass just moved me. So here's all the colors that I picked. Sorry about the towel. But anyway, I picked these colors. The paper is this color, brown. And so I just drag a color like this one here. This pastel is the one that I use to make that mark. And I just look out at what I'm looking at and put the color down where I see it. So it's all of these absolutely gorgeous colors. The darkest browns are these guys, you know, and so those are the darkest shapes in the trees. And this shapes I'm critical of. It's too busy right now. So I've got to unify the shapes. And I need some light on the top of the lupin, which will probably be something like this. See? So it's kind of cool. It's a little bit, it's not white though. And so I will carefully look at my photograph now and think about it and figure out how to unify the whole painting. Especially a complex scene like this, I can do it in a couple hours and put the colors and the shapes in the right place. And then when I get home, I look at it and critique it and say, do I need more highlights? Do I need more dark in the shadows of the trunks of the trees? You know, what's it missing? And then I know this is a really important piece of advice that I tell everybody. Do not kiss your painting to death. Do not think that just because you have a color in your hand that you're going to make it better by putting more strokes on it. Do not overdo it. Listen to the quiet voice inside that says, shh, stop right now while you've got it. Don't push it over the edge and have to throw it out. That's my advice about that one. I go back and forth between oil and pastel. If I want to do something quick in the field and I don't want it too much mess, I'll bring my pastels. The difference in medium, it doesn't change the inspiration because I'm still looking at a scene and seeing the shapes and the color, of course. I like to have the canvas right even with my eyes. So these are really cool little panels that I like to use. They go in a wet panel box, kind of like this. So when I get done painting on it, I can just go like this and wrap it up and put it back in my backpack. And so this is how I started out with a blank canvas like this. I have bristle brushes and I have soft sable brushes, and they have a different personality, different way that they look on the canvas. So right now I'm just going to use this brush to kind of smush some color around on the top of the canvas. So the reason to do this is to kind of get some kind of a color that you see a little bit of in the scene, and it will peek out when you start putting all of the colors on top of it. You don't have to cover every single spot because it'll look nice if a little bit of this, which is yellow ochre, shows through. So I'm just smushing it around real fast like this. Oh, isn't that a pretty color? I just throw it out on the grass and let it dry in the sun for a few minutes while I'm putting out the colors. When I first go out on a painting location, I'm responding to the color of the place. And in this location, I love all of the colors that I see in the water. The longer I look at the water, I see violets in the background. I see beautiful, kind of a complex blues. And then as it comes closer to shore, of course, it turns greener because I can see the sand through the water. The sand is warm, has a little bit of this ochre in it, so it's turning green, like mixing blue and yellow together makes kind of a green. Of course, I always start out, I have titanium white, I have cad yellow light, the wonderful warm yellow called Indian yellow, yellow ochre, cadmium orange, I have cadmium red light, I have alizarin, I have this dioxazine purple, which I will probably use to deepen some of the shadows. It's a very intensely pigmented color. Then I have ultramarine blue, which you have to pretty much have on all your palettes. Then I have cobalt blue, phthalo blue, which is really wonderful and strong, phthalo blue green, cobalt teal. The other color that I want to make sure I have out here is enough of these reds that I can make a really pretty gray in the shadow areas. So this one here is called alizarin crimson. We're going to mix those two together with ultramarine blue, and we'll have a nice dark to do the drawing with. So when you're selecting a spot for your easel, you want to, well, of course you want to put it where the view is the most accessible for you, for your eyes, but you also want to make sure that your canvas is not in sun, because your colors are going to end up being way dark at the end of the day if you're painting in bright light. Of course, I've got this underpainted now with a pale yellow ochre, and I'm going to start with yellow ochre on top of yellow ochre, because I'm thinking, okay, what if you're a little nervous about where you're headed with your drawing? Well, if I'm just drawing on top of something that I've already colored the same way, I'm not making a huge commitment right away. So it's kind of cool to be able to do it this way. So when I'm looking at a scene like this, whether it's landscape or architecture, I will use my brush to decide the angle. So I'm kind of holding it and going, okay, if that's straight horizontal, that cliff, the top of the cliff is going downhill. The experience of being out in the field by yourself with your pastels or your oils, and things happen when you're observing quietly for an hour or an hour and a half. Things happen. Critters gently travel in front of you because they don't even see you there. You're so quiet. You know, I mean, the light changes, the wind blows, the light on the water changes, and it's just like a gift. That's where my inspiration comes from, really, is that experience of being outside and seeing a landscape in a different way. Ooh, look what happened. The fog's come in, it's changing all the colors. Darn! No! The fog is pink. It's changing the color of the water. I don't like it as much. But, woo, look at how beautiful that is out there. Okay, never mind. We're gonna put it in. And I got to make the horizon darker than the sky. So now I'm measuring value, and I'm seeing how different the value is from there. I want it to be that dark. Now, see how the light has changed so much on the water now with the fog sitting on it? Look at that dark, this, almost ominous. People ask me all the time, they say, well, gosh, how long does it take to get good? You know, I mean, you've been doing this for so long. And I go, you can get really good at this if you focus on it. In a couple of years, you can get really good. It doesn't take 50 years.
Let's see
And
how that looks.
going to art school would help speed that up. But you just basically have to put your mind to it and, practice. A teacher of mine said to me, she said, well, Anne, most people, I tell them they have to do 1,000 paintings before they'll get it. She said, for you, 500. You'll get it by 500. And so I just kept that in my mind, and I went, okay, let's do 500, and let's just get it under our belt and give ourselves permission to discard them along the way. I didn't do images because I thought they would sell. I still don't paint because I think, oh, if I do that, it will sell. Because if I do that, I'm almost always wrong. I do what I think is interesting to me and fun. So like the typewriter, I always liked the old typewriters. And I thought, well, I'm just going to make a print of that. Somebody will like it. If I like it, somebody will like it. But I don't do it I don't scheme and, think that way. I think that's really bad advice when someone says just, well, what's going to sell? It's really important that you listen to the little tiny quiet voice that's inside you when you're in your 20s or teens. That little tiny voice that says, you know what I really like doing best is drawing, or what I really like best. And I was sort of embarrassed to tell people, but you have to listen to that little voice. And people would say, well, what is it you really like to do? And I said, well, I really like to mix colors. And I was so embarrassed because here I had been through graduate school in art history, and really when it came right down to it, I just loved color so much. I found it so interesting. And so I listened to that little quiet voice when I was struggling with dissatisfaction as a graphic designer and going, what am I going to do? And well, I'll just learn how to silk screen and I'll get to use all these great colors and shapes. And so my advice would be to listen to that quiet voice that tells you what, and ask yourself, what is it you really like to do the best? Because some people are naturally gifted more with a pencil and paper, design. Some people just immediately know how to draw. But most of the people I know at least had to be taught or had to train themselves, like how I learned. And you also want to listen to what's important to you and try to express that. I don't think it's important to be in style. If it speaks to me from here, it's fine art. That's my opinion. It could be a third grader. That's why I love doing what we do down here.